Hi, everybody, and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles, and on this episode, we're doing something that came to me as an idea from my brother Frank. And you may have seen my brother Frank on the channel before. Most likely, you may have heard his voice as the guy giving me questions on some of my quiz videos. And he kind of had an idea to build the perfect wrestler using a spinning wheel. Well, I don't own a spinning wheel. So what I decided, going to create both the best and worst possible professional wrestlers, and how I'm going to do that. If you watch my Who Was Better videos, I grade people on 8 different categories: technical wrestling, striking, how they wrestle as a heel, how they wrestle as a face, promo ability, presentation, charisma, and big game wrestling, basically how they step up when the stakes are at the highest. So I'm going to go down each of these categories. For the best and the worst, I'm going to pick a professional wrestler that I'm going to take that attribute from to build my wrestler with. I do have some caveats. I cannot use the same wrestler twice. So while someone might be the best in more than one category, unfortunately I can only use them for one. And for the second thing, this is all wrestlers that have made it to the big time, whether that be AEW, ECW, WCW, WWE, AWA. I'm not gonna crap on a local indie guy that has 4 matches under his belt and is terrible. So these are all somewhat big name wrestlers or have gotten a chance at one of the biggest stages. With that being said, we're going to start off with the wrestler I would choose for technical ability, and for my best wrestler, it's going to be Bret Hart. Bret Hart is pretty much unmatched when it comes to technical ability. There's a couple different ways I could have went here, but to me, when you think of a technical wrestler, Bret is the guy that comes in your head. That's why he was picked here. For the worst wrestler with technical ability, I'm going with the Great Khali. And I don't mean to pick on the guy, and some of these things, it may just be a wrestler's weakness. Great Khali had a great presence, and he looked the part. Unfortunately, his in-ring work wasn't great. So for him, his technical wrestling is going to be my component for the worst wrestler. Now going into striking, for my best wrestler striking wise, I'm going to take Rob Van Dam striking. If you watched Rob Van Dam, especially at ECW, the way he kicked people and the innovative ways he would come with throwing kicks or punches or forearms, I think to me he's one of the best strikers of all time. There are other people I thought of, like Tajiri was another one I thought of here, but I just thought the overall flexibility of Rob Van Dam gave him a little bit of a nod here, so he's going to get on there for that. Now for my component for my worst wrestler in striking, Shane McMahon. And Shane, God bless him, he was a daredevil, he was crazy at what he did, but the man couldn't throw a punch. He has the worst wrestling punches I've ever seen. For that, he goes onto my worst wrestler striking wise. Now for my component for how they perform as a heel, on my best side, I'm going to go with Roddy Piper. And it's kind of hard because Piper a lot of times is thought of as a babyface because his persona was so good that it transferred him into that. But to me, if you look back at the early WrestleMania years, WrestleMania 1, WrestleMania 2, his years in Portland, I don't think there's a better heel in the history of wrestling than Roddy Piper. I think Roddy Piper is fantastic. He's my first favorite wrestler, and he makes this list because I think he's one of the best heels of all time, and I think he'd be perfect for this. Now going for our worst component, heel component, we're going with Bill Goldberg. Bill Goldberg as a heel was super obvious that Bill Goldberg did not want to be a heel. There are a lot of wrestlers that you could categorize in that way, but for me, the overall package of Goldberg as a heel, it just didn't feel like he was even trying. So for that, he's our worst component. Now going for our babyface components. On the best side, I'm going with one of the baby faces that really got me cheering as a little kid, and that's the Junkyard Dog. Junkyard Dog had so much charisma and so much fire that people just wanted to get behind him. They wanted to cheer for him. They wanted to root for the dog to do whatever he could, whether that be in Mid-South, whether that be in WWE. He was like a force of nature. There are very few wrestlers that you can look at as a one-of-one where it's impossible to copy them, and Junkyard Dog is one. Now on my babyface side, for my worst, the component I'm going to use, Ronda Rousey. And it's kind of the same with Goldberg. I feel that Ronda as a babyface never really fit. I don't think the fans really ever wanted to cheer for her. A lot of it's because of what she said about pro wrestling. A lot of it is her personality didn't come through. She came through as snarky. She came through as condescending, even as a babyface. So for that, she ended up being a terrible babyface in my opinion. That's why I picked her for this component for my worst wrestler. Next up, promo ability. For my best, I'm going with CM Punk. Love him or hate him, the wrestling world for the better part of 20 years has hung on pretty much everything the man has done. And 90% of that comes from what comes out of his mouth. Whether it be the pipe bomb, his AEW return promo, his promos against Drew McIntyre. I mean, the guy's just fantastic at every time he puts a microphone in his hand. I can honestly say that Punk is easily on the Mount Rushmore of promo guys in the history of wrestling. That's why I'm picking him for this component. That's why he makes my creative wrestler on the best side. Now, for my creative wrestler on the worst side for promos, Curtis Axel, aka Michael McGillicuddy. I don't want to pick on the guy because I think there was something there, and I think if he could have been nurtured better, he might have ended up being a very serviceable, good wrestler. And he did end up having a little bit of personality towards the end, but I think there was a lot of balls dropped. I don't think he got the proper training, and unfortunately, anytime he was handed a microphone, he felt like he was nervous. He felt like he was out of place. Coming from the fact that he's Curt Hennig's kid, a guy who was an absolute amazing promo, it was a little bit surprising, but I can also understand that the pressure was probably too much for him to handle. When you look at these guys and you think of these second generation wrestlers, often it's easy to see someone like The Rock or Randy Orton or Roman Reigns who succeed, and you can see where they picked up from their parents. But the other side is when you look at someone like Curtis Axel here, or Eric Watts, or even David Flair, you can see where sometimes the pressure of being a child of a legendary wrestler breaks them, and they can't quite live up to the expectations. A lot of it is they get a lot of push very soon, and they're not ready for it. I like Curtis Axel, I really did. I just don't think he was ever a great promo. Now going from that, our next category, presentation. This is basically your ring robe, your music, your special entrances. For my best wrestler, the one I'm taking this from is Kenny Omega. And this might be a little bit of a strange choice for a lot of people, especially if you didn't watch his New Japan work. But to me, I think the way that Omega's presented, with his entrances, with his music, he's always been treated, at least since the evolution of the Cleaner character, he's always been treated as a big game guy. A guy that's going to be in the main event. A guy that's going to give you their best. And whether it be his awesome theme music, which he's always had awesome theme music, or anytime he's cosplayed as one of his favorite video game characters, or just his overall aura, Omega's top notch for me. I think he has the best presentation in all of wrestling right now. That's why he was picked for my best wrestler. Now, for my worst wrestler, I'm going with Mordecai. Mordecai looked cool, and once you got off of a still image of Mordecai and you seen how he was actually presented, it's like, okay, he's just the opposite of The Undertaker. And it's goofy, and he had the weird, somewhat cross, it wasn't a cross, and the white hair and the white outfit. I mean, we're not playing Mortal Kombat here, we're having pro wrestling. If you want to have someone as an Undertaker foe that plays off of the Undertaker mythos, look at the template for Kane. Mordecai, not so much. They went a little bit too far into the hokiness, and maybe if it was made a decade earlier, it might have been better, but unfortunately, it never came off well. Now, our next category, charisma. For my best wrestler, I'm taking Scott Hall. I don't think there's ever been a more charismatic wrestler than Scott Hall. There have been people that I would consider equal to him, like Roddy Piper, or Macho Man Randy Savage, or The Rock, but I don't think that any wrestler has ever been more charismatic than Scott Hall. To me, his mere presence oozes machismo, and pun is intended there. Everything about him made you feel like he was special, no matter where he was on the card, no matter what match he was in, no matter what he was doing. That's why, for me, I pick him for my charisma component. Now, for my worst wrestler, charisma-wise, it's another guy I actually like, Eddie Edwards. Edwards. I think Eddie Edwards has succeeded in spite his lack of charisma, and I don't mean this in a bad way. I like Eddie Edwards. I like watching his matches, but he's never been a guy that pulled you in just with his personality. He's never been a guy that you like just because you feel connected to him. And to me, and this is going to sound really weird, but ever since he started doing the braids and the cornrows in his hair, I feel like he's even gone the opposite way, where his charisma's gone into the negative end. Whereas before he was just bland, now he's bland and goofy, in my opinion. And when he gets in the ring, Eddie Edwards is great. He's a great wrestler. I just think that he doesn't have that charisma to make him a big star. And I know TNA has leaned on him, or Impact at the time, leaned on him to be the face of their company. That's why I considered him, but it didn't quite ever fit for me that he had that charisma. Now, last but not least, the last category, my components for big game performers. Like I said, this is your main events of a pay-per-view, your house show main events, the guys that bring the people into their seats. How do they perform on the biggest stage? The first person I'm taking for my best wrestler, Kurt Angle. While Kurt Angle may not have a 5-star match by Dave Meltzer, I do think that for Kurt Angle's time, he is one of the best, if not the best, big game wrestlers there is. Whether it be WrestleMania, whether it be Bound for Glory in TNA, whether it be a Royal Rumble, no matter where you put the guy, if you gave Kurt Angle the ball, he was going to run with it and he was going to score a touchdown. To me, he's absolutely the epitome of what I think of when I think of a big game wrestler. Someone that I can't think of one pay-per-view match that I would consider bad. And for that, I'm putting Kurt Angle as my component for big game performer on my best side. Now on my worst side, specifically for the Sin Cara run, Sin Cara, the Mystico version. And I know Mystico is a legendary luchador that had great matches as Mystico, headlined big selling events in Mexico and all over the world, but specifically his run as Sin Cara, anytime he had any kind of a big stage, he fumbled massively. Whether it be his debut, whether it be any of the matches where he had a botch to the point where people called him Botchkar at some point. He was a guy that was brought in and looked at as the replacement for Rey Mysterio, which there's never going to be a replacement for Rey Mysterio, just so everyone knows. He's a one-of-one. But Sin Cara came in with a ton of hype, never ever lived up to it, and I would say, much like other people like Curtis Axel I mentioned earlier, he folded under the pressure. So for that, he's my worst. Now just a quick recap, my best wrestler is going to be built from the parts of Bret Hart's technical wrestling, Rob Van Dam's striking, Roddy Piper's heel persona, Junkyard Dog's face persona, CM Punk's promos, Kenny Omega's presentation, Scott Hall's charisma, and Kurt Angle's big game performance. That are the components that make up my best wrestler. My worst wrestler is going to be made up of the Great Khali's technical ability, Shane McMahon's striking ability, Bill Goldberg's heel persona, Ronda Rousey's face persona, Curtis Axel's promo ability, Mordecai's presentation, Eddie Edwards' charisma, and Sin Cara's big game performances. With that, I think you have the absolute best wrestler you could build and probably the absolute worst wrestler you could build. Let me know what you guys think. Did you like this format? Did you like this idea? Shout out to Frank again for giving it to me. Who would you build your best wrestler with? Who would you build your worst wrestler with? Let me know down here in the comments. With all that being said, my name is George Coles, and you've been watching Heel Heat.